Hey everyone, welcome to the Power Platform Pro / Code First Developer Office Hours for June 2024. My name is Marc Schweigert. We've got a lot of folks from Microsoft. I'll try to do some loose introductions, but I want to save as much time for the content and the AMA. In the room, I'm happy to say that I'm in Redmond this week. So unfortunately, we're all on the same team here, but I only get to see these people every once in a while because I live on the East Coast and they work on the West Coast. But so we've got a number of folks on what we call the Power Apps Pro Dev pod, and we're the team that builds things like Pack CLI, built and contribute to the VS Code extension, Azure DevOps build tool, a number of things that professional developers use in the context of the work that they do. Quickly, since we got everybody in the room, I'll just have everybody go around the horn real quick, just say who you are and what your focus area is, and we'll start with Crash.
Yep, so I'm Crash Collison. I largely work on the Pack CLI tools as well as some of the other places it's used, like the ADO Power Platform build tools and GitHub Actions.
Andrew? Engineering manager, same team as Crash, working on Pack CLI, Azure DevOps tools. Some new YAML features that you will hear about today as well, and working closely with Marcel, with my PM.
That's a perfect transition to Marcel.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Marcel Ferreira. I'm a PM, Pro developer on all YAML in PowerX. Happy to be here. Peter.
Yeah, I'm Peter Wilson. I have a long history with FNO, and now I am engaging in the test engine, which is our new exciting product that we look so much forward to taking to GA.
Awesome. And Amrose.
Yeah, so I'm Amrit. I'm currently an intern on Andrew's team, the Build Tools team. So.
And I see David over there. David, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, sure. I'm one of the engineers working with Andrew, Marcel, Crash, Amrit, and all the rest of the folks. And yeah, that's
all right. Cool. So we could keep going, but then I think we'd spend a lot of time and interest. So I'll try to briefly introduce a few other people as we go. Just some housekeeping notes. The agenda today, loosely of Microsoft Build Conference recap, except not the entire conference, mostly just a subset of the work that this team and some of our partner teams at Microsoft did leading up to Build. We'll kind of quickly allude to some of the tools updates, and then we'll get to the AMA. So we want to get through a lot of content today. Again, the tool is open. The AMA tool is open. Please vote up questions versus adding duplicates of questions, because the format we use is the most voted in the community during the office hours gets answered first. What are the office hours, right? So this is first of all, many of you do participate in non-disclosure agreement communities, right? So MVPs and customers who have NDAs, etc. This is a public office hours. The recording is made available to the public, so please do not ask or allude to questions that have anything related to things that you are aware of due to your NDA. We will pretend that you didn't ask the question or that the thing that you're asking about doesn't exist and move on. It's really our attempt to have a forum with the community to learn about what's new month over month, right? Keep you up to date, because it's hard to keep up to date. Occasionally, and we want to do more of this moving forward, we might ask polls about feature investments or which features should we invest over the next few months, given, like all of you, we have a finite set of resources to do a huge backlog of work that everybody wants us to do, right? And so one of the many hard things in software development is choosing what to do next. And so we want to get more involved in getting your feedback to make sure we're doing the work that provides you the most value. This is a regular forum to ask questions of members across the Power Platform product. So I'll introduce some other folks who we invite that sometimes will participate and schedule permitting, sometimes won't. You can ask questions about how something works, raise new feature requests, share ideas, etc. What this is not, and this is really important, this is not your personal support hotline. If you're like, hey, I have this issue on GitHub, can you answer it right now? We're going to defer you to GitHub and say, we'll follow up with you on GitHub. This is really for the entire community, so don't try to monopolize this as your way of getting answers to something that's very specific to you and what you're doing. Try to ask questions that are broadly applicable and useful for everybody participating. If you ask us questions that we think should be a support request, we'll let you know, or an issue on GitHub, we'll ask you to go start a discussion on GitHub or file an issue on GitHub. And this is not a forum for licensing questions. You're talking to the engineers and product managers who build the things. And whether for better or worse, we don't make the licensing decisions, and we're not licensing experts, right? So if we can answer a question, we'll certainly do our best, but we don't want to monopolize the time of these office hours around licensing questions. So we'll most likely redirect you to your account team to get those questions answered. With that, if you're here, you probably already know how to register, but just in case, or you want to share with a friend, you go to our GitHub repo, you go to this aka.ms link. There is an ICS file that you can download and add to your calendar. It's a recurring calendar entry, so you can always come back and attend. You don't have to register each time, etc. With that, there's a bunch of people we invite. Some of the people that have already introduced themselves. Scott, I need to add you to the, most of you I'm sure know Scott Thoreau, but those of you who don't, he's a cloud advocate at Microsoft with a long history with Power Platform. We consider Scott one of our virtual team members, so thanks for attending, Scott. Tons of people, Matt Barber, a legend in the Power Platform world, and it looks like Matt is here today. Sometimes he can join, sometimes he can't. Lots of other people. I'm not going to go through every name. The point is we're trying to bring the product managers and engineers who build the things that you use to this office hours, so that when you ask a question, the person who wrote the code or wrote the spec can give you the answer, and not go, oh, like, let me get back to you next month because I got to go hunt down the person who actually knows the answer to this question. So we've got people across product development, customer advisory teams, learn content, patterns and practices, etc. Right? So with that, the updates, I'm not going to go into the developer tools release notes, right? They're there. We've updated the Learn documentation. We have each release we make, we have pretty good detailed release notes. One of the things we've learned is people just weren't aware of it. So we've tried to raise awareness to that. We're gonna, I've pointed some links to both the official Build Power Platform recap blog post and the official Power Apps Build recap blog post for if you haven't taken a look at those. And some of the topics we'll cover today are a subset of what's in those. Here is an aka.ms link for the session that talks about some of the things we'll talk about today. So if you want to go back and watch the recorded build session or the session from build, Scott and Marcel also did a session that is code first and pro code and using Power Platform full stack, which I would highly recommend. I think it's actually one of the best all-encompassing Power Platform with pro code extensibility sessions I've ever seen. That is not pandering. I've seen a lot through a lot of years, and I really think it's one of the best ones I've ever seen. So I definitely encourage you to go check that out. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Marcel.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So I really encourage you to watch these sessions that Mark just mentioned. I'm biased, but I really like those as well. But I want to highlight a few points of this session. So in this session, we show, and we announced lots of things. We showed our developer tools. We show some new features. I want to spend some time talking about this feature, which is super important, Workload Identity Federation. So basically, in the past, we created some new ways to make easier for you to authenticate your repo to your environments. So we have pack create to create SPNs. So it will create the secrets for you as well. So you can easily set up your Azure DevOps or your GitHub Actions, right? But the fact is you still need to manage your certificates. We do support manage identity as well, but you still need to have your pack CLI running in an Azure resource or something like that. And there is a new feature called Workload Identity Federation. I encourage you to have a look on that. This is brand new, and we added support for that. So I really want to highlight, there are links there for 2 posts in our GitHub. One, it is how you set up this in Azure DevOps using our build tools. And the another post is how do you set up these using GitHub Actions. But the principle is the same. Basically, you have a service principal And you don't need to use certificates or secrets on this service principal anymore. You basically establish a trust relationship between your repository and your Azure and your Dataverse environment, so you don't need to worry about it anymore. It's really great, and please have a look on these posts. If you have questions about how to use, raise questions in these posts. Crash is here. Crash implemented that. I'm here, is already helping. I just want to share two quick nuances. If you are using Azure DevOps and you want to use Workflow Identity Federation, remember, always go through the setup. I encourage you to use the first task, who am I? Because that will do all what is needed to do the first authentication. After that, you can go wild and customize and do whatever you want. So that is the recommendation for Azure DevOps. And on GitHub, I really recommend you to understand how they implemented the way you authenticate. There is a scope there. So you need to set up an environment, or is really very specific. It has to do on the way Azure implemented this. So please pay attention to that. If you have questions, if you need to clarify, use these links here as a gateway for us to understand first if you are using, if it's valuable, and how can we make this better and easier to use.
So one of the things I want to do is thank Crash for documenting all this in the GitHub repo, right? Because we wanted to get this out as fast as possible. And in order to do that, we had to cut some corners, like official documentation on Learn. That's not to suggest that there shouldn't be official documentation on Learn. We will get it there. But Crash basically put the rough documentation in a GitHub discussion so people can get started using this feature either in Azure DevOps or GitHub. So thanks, Crash. I really appreciate that. So with that, one of the things that we also did recently, something that I've always done in almost all of my Azure DevOps pipelines, is in addition to the tasks or GitHub actions, there are times when Pack does something that isn't exposed as a task or action. And the ceremony you had to go through to wire up being able to call Pack directly from a script task was pretty involved, and it was error prone. So we added a simple enhancement that the installer tool task or action now will do that work for you if you opt into it. And what that ultimately means then is that from any script task, when the tasks or actions don't do something you want to do, but Pack CLI does, you can drop to Pack CLI to execute that function until we get around to exposing it as a task or an action. Which then begs a very interesting and controversial question, which I've posted a link to our GitHub discussion on. Like, what is the value to you folks in the community of tasks and actions versus being able to call Pack CLI directly? Because at the end of the day, the tasks and actions are wrappers around Pack CLI. And I think the self-answering question is the convenience of using the Azure DevOps, GitHub, YAML syntax to declaratively use things versus calling a CLI. But this is a very opinionated discussion. Some people just want to use a CLI. Some people want to use tasks. Our compromise right now is we give you the tasks and actions, but until we kind of create those wrappers, you can still use the CLI directly. So please engage in that discussion because it could influence where we spend our time. We could spend less time building task and action wrappers and doing other things that you've asked us to do because, like I said in the beginning, like you, we have a finite set of resources to do all the things you're asking us to do. And with that, here's an example of using that in conjunction with Workload Federated Identity, right? So now I've added the tools to the path. I've called Pack auth create with GitHub federated, and then I can just call Pack env using the auth profile that use Workload Identity Federation. In Azure DevOps, it's a little bit more involved. The discussion of the wire up for this is in the GitHub discussion as well. But again, it's just a sample of like feeding off of the Workload Identity Federation part of this. Marcel, back to you.
Yeah, perfect. So now one of the biggest announcement is about the code view that we have in Power Apps Studio now. So setting some context, Power Apps Canvas specifically is where pro developers, we get to work with makers. We get to work with makers a lot. So what we are doing now, we are kind of showing the power of code to makers, right? I don't need to convince anybody here about how important the code it is, but the fact that is now we have code experiences in Power Apps Studio. You can see the code for your Canvas application, you can copy the code, and you can paste a YAML code to create new controls. And that comes with a discussion. Okay, I have seen this YAML before, actually. I use pack canvas and pack. And is this the same format? That's what I want to talk today and really highlight. Is there a source code for Canvas app? It means that we are using the pack canvas and pack format. Yes and no, okay? And I want to be very, very clear here. It's an evolution. It's really an evolution. So defining a Canvas app is basically a MS app. That's the binary of the Canvas, and that is a zip file. We have some resources in this file. The most important one is just JSON file, which is the serialized app. Let's put it this way. That serialization format is not designed to be stable across load and save cycles. It means you cannot source control because you will have lots of noisy diffs. It's kind of useless for pro developers to source control. That's why we did the experiment of creating pack canvas and pack. That is an experimental feature which will convert these files in a YAML format, which you can source control, and is based in the Power Apps tools tooling, which is a GitHub repo. That the link is there. If anybody can share in the chat the link for that repo, that's the source of our pack canvas and pack. I want to be very clear that the direction it is to deprecate this tool. We will no longer need a conversion because we are building this source code, this YAML natively in the MS app. It means that moving forward in the future, you will have this YAML, this source code directly in the MS app. So you don't need to use pack canvas and pack anymore. You can use pack canvas download with the parameter D, which will unzip the file for you and give everything there. You have the YAML files, you will have the legacy JSON files as well. And and also we will add a git ignore, so we will be explicit about which files you can ignore and which ones you use to source control. Okay? It means the format is changing as well. Originally, this tool will create fx.yaml files. We are moving that to pa.yaml. Okay, and this is because we want to be very specific. This is a source code for a Canvas application. We are also simplifying the YAML. We will make it very, very simple, and we will provide a public schema. So it's a public contract, so you can use that to understand and edit and build new apps. This is the direction, okay? And also, I want to say we have a Power Apps Canvas Git version control. This is also an experimental feature. We want to sunset that. We want to use the Power Platform Git native integration that we are building now as well. So that's really the direction in the future. And I want to stress that, please, pack canvas and pack is experimental feature, is not intended to be used in production. If you have issues, and we had an issue a couple of weeks ago, we will pay attention to this repo. We will fix the bugs as much as we can. But this is an experimental feature. The direction is really to have this native format in the MS app.
Awesome.
Okay.
That's a great tee up for Casey and Shan, who are going to talk about Power Platform native Git integration. Casey, you want to just take control?
Yep.
Right on.
Hopefully I don't talk about it too much. I'd rather just show you here. So we did promise in the last community call just to rerun the demo from build. So basically everything Marcel was just talking about here, wanted to run you through it. So I'm in my demo environment right now, and I have a solution, I'd say, medium sophistication, but I do have a lot of different types of components in it. So various apps, Canvas apps, co-pilots, and so forth. For a long time now, we've had the ability to release through what we call in-product ALM through pipelines. But pipelines is very much a release vehicle. So the next step for us was really about source control, which covers your inner developer loop, right? So now you can see the source control tab directly in the Maker portal. I do not have any pending changes because I've already committed everything else as I was running other demos to source control. So you can see though, I'm connected to Azure DevOps right now. So my environment is connected, and this is the ADO organization, project, repo, branch, and folder. So really to connect your environment, you just have to fill in these properties really quick and you're already set up to go. It takes a few seconds. And then it's linked over here if you want to go and see it in ADO. So first what I'm going to do though is just tab over and show what Marcel was just talking about is the code view. So you can see here right in line in the Canvas Studio, I can copy this header and then I'll just paste it to a notepad really quick just to show you how I can edit these properties really quick. We'll call this the ticketing screen. We'll copy that back. And then I'm just going to do a really simple change here where I go ahead and paste this because I want to reuse this component down here. So we'll paste the code view. And you can see now it's directly on the screen. So I'll go ahead and publish my changes now, and this just takes a second. We'll publish this version. Okay. And now I'll just go back into the solution here, refresh. And once it's done publishing here, you'll see these changes come up. Make sure. There we go. So now you can see that it actually tracked the change on that Canvas app that I just made. And similarly, if I go in and create new objects in the solution, edit anything, they're all going to show up under your track changes, so you know exactly what you're going to be committing to source control. So now directly in line, I can give a commit message and just say updated the header. And what I want you to notice here is we're committing just the delta change directly to source control. So if you've used the dev tooling in the past, you have this pretty long loop where, you know, it might have taken 4 or 5 minutes to export a solution of this size and then export it into source control. Whereas now it really just takes a few seconds to actually push those delta changes.
And as much as we
actually a little faster yesterday.
As much as we love Pack CLI, we actually see those of you who use Pack Solution Export, Unpack, Pack Solution Clone, and Pack Solution Sync, using those nouns and verbs much less if you opt into starting to use native source control integration, because those gestures are greatly improved with the native Git integration.
Yeah, so that commit succeeded, and it gives me a link just to bounce over to Azure DevOps. By the way, we are starting with Azure DevOps. We will support GitHub in the future, though. And so I have a link to that commit, and I can see exactly what changed. And just to kind of show you really quickly here, if we go back to the files, so you can see it actually includes everything in my solution. So I have my commands, my model-driven apps, different sitemap, Copilot, everything that was in my solution gets committed to your repo, and it's just kind of built into your native flow of work. So it's really easy to get things into source control. I'm going to hand over to Shan, who's going to go a little bit deeper into some of these topics and the different ways to connect. Shan, you want to just take control of my screen and run it here? It's probably easier.
I've got my other screen going here too. I'll just do it from here.
Perfect. Okay.
I just didn't check your source control there to see what's going on, but I have been verifying things over here. So anyways, I'm going to go back here. So similar to what Casey was showing here, I've got a solution called Temp here. Casey had bound his entire environment into source control. In this environment here, we're actually binding individual solutions to different source code repos or locations here. Got them all in the same repo, just different folders here. But for this solution here, I've got it bound into a location just for the solution. In here, I've got 2 tables. I just this morning, like two minutes before or 25 minutes ago here, just created T3 here as a table. It took about 30 seconds to create. There's nothing special within this solution, but just creating a new table here. As we go into the source control system, you're going to see that the table was created, and all the individual attributes that are, system attributes that are related to that table are all in here. This relationships and forms queries and stuff like that, and an update to the solution. So I'm going to do commit here, just go create table 3.3 and commit that to my main branch, and going to put this now into source control. So in the past, once you did this, you would literally have to export the entire solution, do an unpack. That export would take about 5 minutes or more. You'd unpack it, put it into source control, let source control sort out all the diffs. And that would be great from a one-way standpoint. But if you want to take conflicts in, then that would be a real big problem, because you'd have to stash your solutions. You'd be exporting to an unmanaged solution, stash it on the side, import what is latest in your source control system, and then re-import your solution on top of that to see if you can at least have a merge of those. You'd be wanting to cherry pick only the things that you've changed there. And it's very, because of that, it's a very long writing process. It takes you sometimes half an hour or more, and it's problematic. You have to know exactly what you're changing before you do it, or you could lose some stuff in your environment. But in this one, you're going to be hitting the commit with abandon. This environment is only going from here, so we're pushing from here to Git. We're going to be previewing going to a public preview towards the end of July to early August when it hits the first stations, and further out as for more stations. But we're going to have two-way sync, so we're going to be pushing and pulling within that, and look forward to seeing that. You're going to be hitting these commits with abandon. So I can do what Casey did and follow that PR all the way over here. You'll start to see that there is some formats. These are changing. We've accepted some feedback from our preview audience here, and this attribute XML is actually going to just be Katosa name.xml and not so deep in here. We use the same pattern across everything, but you can now start to think of every attribute, every component has its own unique file. So whether it's a form, whether it's a ribbon diff, whether it's a saved query, all this kind of stuff, everything is its own unique file. I want to sort of highlight also in the solutions. So we actually put the solutions in a individual file, and for each solution, we actually now show what the root components are. So this one, as I've added here to the T3 root component here, and the solution components list are, you should think of this, these are the files that we use to build a solution from the pack command. So that pack command is going to follow into the August, September timeframe as well, so you can actually build from source control. But we've added in here, we've added that table and all these attributes. So all of these files got added to that solution file. So this is much like a CS proj file if this was a .NET project. And basically, these are the things here that we're doing. We're also trying to avoid noisy diffs as well, and sort these types of things so you get things in bigger blocks and don't get a lot of reorders and stuff like that. But you should think of it now as in source control, everything that you've got in your source environment is going to be proxied to one-to-one to files in your source control system. So we're orienting towards that one component in the environment is one file in the source control system. Now, from a little bit how you're going to see this, I talked about, we're going to see into the early August, you're going to be able to get into the public previews and see this as action. You can, we're visioning this to be a side-by-side implementation with your existing, if you're already doing DevOps operations. Think of these as additional files on the side. And as this matures and we get the ability for you to build, then you can start to rely on this as your primary source and then deprecate or remove your old source and move over to this. We also are going to unfold a pro dev scenarios as well later on into the fall as well. So stay tuned for these types of things, but you're going to walk, crawl, and run into this scenario. The first thing that's going to be is here, integrate your stuff, see how we persist against source control, do full two-way sync in there. The other thing that you should also anticipate is we're going to move these over to YAML files. So pretty much everything in the solution file will be YAML. A lot of people ask us why, and in reality, it's less markup, easier to read. And the most important thing for me is it's easier to merge. So more reliable merges is always better when you're dealing with branches. We're going to walk into supporting multiple dev environments hooked to the same service control. We're going to look into collaboration using source, and we're going to look into using branching and stuff like that for isolation as well. So all of those capabilities are going to unfold in towards this year, and we're looking towards GAing later as well. So we're going to get to continuously improve and do this as we go through with you. That's what I wanted to share for today.
Awesome. Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Jan. All right, Marcel, if you can share your desktop and then I'll manage the Q&A queue.
Doing it right now.
Pin the first one. Oh, shoot. I didn't pin it. I closed it. So Casey, the first question was actually, I think, for you. And the question was, will there come a day where you can use pipelines to deploy across tenants?
That's a question we get quite a bit. We do not have current plans to do that. There's actually quite a bit of sophistication and hoops we would have to jump through on our end, but we are tracking the use case. What you're seeing here with source code integration, for example, is we're connected to Azure DevOps. You can absolutely use Azure DevOps to deploy once we kind of get that support in there. So that should be your cross-tenant story for now, or GitHub, obviously. But yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on the use case still for cross-tenant.
Awesome. Thanks, Casey. Next question. I don't think we actually have anybody from the PCF team. So just for clarification, so people understand, the Pack CLI team works with the PCF team to build the PCF tooling. So I don't know if anybody in the room has any sort of answer to the question. I love PCF. What PCF capabilities are coming next?
No, I love PCF as well.
I do too. But I don't know that we have that answer.
Yeah.
Maybe like give us, instead of asking us that broad question, give us some suggestions on what
would you like?
PCF capabilities, both PCF, the framework, right, and PCF, the tooling, you would like to see next. That would really help us. Okay, so clear that one. Next one. I'll take this one. Can we anticipate the same ALM accelerator story for the COE starter kit, whereby in-app features will negate the need for it? If so, are we months or years away from that? So just for context, I used to lead the team that built the ALM accelerator and the COE starter kit and all of the kits that came out of PowerCat tools. And just sort of historically and philosophically, our reason for building those tools was because we felt that there were enough customers that needed what the tools did, and that because those things weren't natively integrated in the product, the level of effort for customers to do those things and the expertise necessary to kind of cobble it all together was high. So we built reference implementations, which technically is what the COE starter kit is. It's a reference implementation of something that you could have built yourself using the Power Platform. Although we built it over the course of years. And so a lot of people use it as is and then extend it. Same thing with the ALM accelerator. Long-winded way of getting to the point. Like since I wrote the original prototype of the accelerator before we had a team around it, I think we're probably about 6 months away from 90+% of what the ALM accelerator does being done natively in the platform, with the remaining pieces, and Casey, feel free to chime in here, being achievable through pipelines for Power Platform extensibility. And we will always be in a world where some teams will need to use pipelines for Power Platform plus Azure DevOps or plus GitHub or plus third-party CI/CD provider to do certain things that we'll never do natively in the product. Like a good example is do code first builds, right? That's something that we'll always, for the foreseeable future, need to offload to something like Azure DevOps as part of the overall process. But we want to have a nice tight integration story. To the COE starter kit, yes, you can assume in the fullness of time, and I don't know what those dates are, what the fullness of time equals in terms of the COE starter kit, but the product is certainly taking inspiration from lessons learned, building the tools that my old team built, and trying to make it such that you don't have to use open source reference implementations or build these sorts of things yourselves, because they're just there as capabilities in the platform. I don't know the timeline. Grant, I don't know if you're on the call. If you are and you want to chime in, go for it. If you're not, or if you are and you don't want to chime in, then we'll move on. All right. I thought Grant said he was going to join the call, but we'll move on.
He was there.
Okay. All right, but we'll just keep going. Power Platform pipelines. How can we move the unmanaged solution from a developer environment to a shared dev environment? Currently, the Power Platform pipeline support only managed solutions from a deployment perspective. Casey, anything to say about those?
Yeah, I'll just say we are supporting the use case, and that will roll out very soon. The implementation that's phrased in the question, will pipelines deploy the unmanaged solution, is no. Pipelines is a release vehicle, and we want to be releasing managed solutions. That said, what we are supporting is anytime you deploy through pipelines, we already store the artifacts, both the managed and the unmanaged solutions. What's going to be coming out soon here is the ability to, within that shared dev environment, just go ahead and import that unmanaged solution into that environment. So it'll be exposed through solution import. And you can do that throughout any of your dev environments or other environments. You always have access to just directly import from pipelines.
I'd like to add to that as well. The real use case here, from what I'm seeing, is customers are sort of doing their own isolated development, and they move it to a shared dev environment, and they're using solutions to be able to do that, where then they ship it from their shared dev environment. I'd encourage us starting to think about how do we use the source control integration and just have isolated dev environments, isolated branches, sync with that, and then use source control to actually move that between your various branches, which is equivalent to your shared dev environment there. So you won't need to do the acrobatics that you're doing today in order to get some isolation. We're significantly going to be investing into developer productivity with isolation for developers, collaboration across developers, and having those shared stable environments too, with the source control integration. And then it'll be deployed upstream to other environments from pipelines as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Shan. I'm definitely looking forward to that. What is the future of embedding Canvas apps inside model-driven apps? So this is another one of those questions where I'll turn it back to the audience and the people who ask, tell us what you think improvements are necessary. I mean, the future right now is that there haven't been any major improvements in the feature set, right? It works as is. Lots of people embed Canvas apps inside model-driven apps. There have been things done over time since the feature was introduced to make the maker experience for it better, the underlying performance of Canvas apps loading within a model-driven app better, right? But in terms of new features and enhancements coming in with that feature set, I'm not aware of anything new. There might be a sort of a underlying question in there. Hey, I haven't seen much change in a long time. Does that mean, you're going to deprecate it or something like that? The answer is no. It's a very useful feature that lots of people use, right? Next one. Could we have an explanation of how the Power Automate version history is working under the covers, please? I know in our internal discussions, Chris Gardy had answered that. Shan, I don't know if Chris is here, but maybe if you could.
Sure. So we actually have versioning now for solution components available in the platform, and that's what the Flow is using as the first component that's doing it. So we're using basically a relational store behind the scenes, non-relational store, sorry, behind the scenes in Dataverse, and managing it. You're gonna see some version APIs that you can use in Dataverse. But bottom line is every save of a flow will basically put a new version that we store. We still in the database, when you query, like say workflows, you're still going to get the latest published version. And that change is sort of consistent with every other published component that supports publishing in Dataverse. But basically we're just saving every time Flow gets a save, they notify Dataverse, we version that, and then they use their versioning APIs to do reverts. When you do a revert, it's basically creating a new version too, and then you hit the publish button as well. We're making that available for other components to onboard to as well, and you'll see some of the AI components coming next, and expect to see that consistently implemented in the platform for most of the components that support versioning.
Awesome. Thank you, Shan. Next question I think is probably going to be for you as well, Shan. We're working on getting rid of unmanaged customizations and have turned on blocking of unmanaged customization features in our environments. We recently found that activating or deactivating processes in CRM, which is now called Dataverse, instances cause unmanaged customizations. What is the recommendation to not run into issues so that we don't end up creating unmanaged layers by performing these activities?
Yeah, this is a known limitation. One thing that's important just for anyone that's using this, and we've actually put it in into the feature enablement, there is a link to our documentation, and we call out reliably the known limitations. There's actually a lot of features that don't work well when the system is locked down and there's limitations there. So unfortunately, customers can't avoid creating these, but we are looking at not sort of like whitelisting some of these operations. Specifically, this one is the workflow enabling and disable creates an active layer. So we're whitelisting it so you can actually enable and disable the workflow and have that control you need. Unfortunately, until that team does the work to not create an active layer, we can't avoid the creation of the active layer. So there's not much that customers can do other than just review the known limitations and use the guidance that we provide there.
Awesome. Thank you, Shan. All right. So the next one is one that I like, but you're not going to like my answer probably. Because this is something that I certainly have asked, myself, would be great if the caching of credentials via pack auth create also applies to CMT, PRT, and all of the other what I will call legacy tools, which you can launch from pack tool PRT. Listen, I agree. Great idea. I think this follows into that category of we all agree. There's lots of things in the backlog, and this is one of those things that probably is a little bit more involved than it seems to actually make work, and it just hasn't met the cut line because of all the other stuff that we're doing. So my suggestion is go to our GitHub discussion. If you're not familiar how to get there, if you type pack on the command line, you will see a link to https://aka.ms/power platform CLI. That redirects you to our repo. Ask this question there. Go talk to all of your friends, all of your coworkers, your friends' coworkers. Get them all to chime into the discussion, vote it up. We pay attention to that stuff. Higher traffic stuff gets more of our attention. It's not a commitment that we're going to do it, but it definitely feeds into our decision-making process of what to do release after release. All right. We'll pin the next one and let's dismiss that one. Is there anything being done on the limitations of Test Studio? It doesn't work with components, and considering many people use components like navigation menu, header, and footer, navigate to other screens in Canvas apps, it's a blocker at the moment. I'm going to let Peter answer this, but before you do, Peter, I want to kind of, it's really important to be precise in these answers. I would say in the short term, we are not doing anything on the limitations of Test Studio specifically. We are focusing on our energy on Test Engine. That's correct. Right? And Peter can talk about that. And then how we go about making, for example, Test Studio be able to generate the full suite of things Test Engine can do is for us to think about later, because Test Engine is the focus. So Peter?
Yeah, so we know about these restrictions, of course. This is not new to us. So as you may know, we are developing what's known as the test engine. We've mentioned it a few times. You can find it on GitHub. Everybody can go in and look at what it looks like. Maybe you can share the link.
I will.
It's not a GA product yet, but we're getting there over time.
I'm going to pause, Peter, right? Because we are working very hard. Peter undersold that. We were working very hard to get Test Engine to GA. Namely, Peter and the team are working in collaboration with Andrew and the team to get Test Engine to GA, addressing what we think are the most critical known limitations in Test Engine, and then iterating from there.
Exactly right. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. So that's exactly right. But even today, if you go into the Test Studio and author a test, there is this thing called download or export, either one of those verbs, where you can get that YAML file that describes what the test is. And even today, you can execute it from the Test Engine right there. So we know about these. We'll get to them at some point. We're looking at other ways of authoring tests as well, apart from within Test Studio. I'm not going to share too much about that at this particular time because the planning is going on, and I don't want to spoil the fun of standing on my soapbox at one of the next meetings.
Yeah.
But we certainly know about this.
But the good news is Peter and team are embracing the open source model.
Yes, we
and
are.
So if you really want to know, just go look at the repo, pay attention to the various branches, and you can figure out what we're doing. Right?
Open source all the way, man. What can I say? Yeah.
All right, let's dismiss that one. Next one. Are you able to share a demo of some practical applications of YAML approach? I think Marcel kind of did already earlier today. We try not to monopolize this time with too much like deep demo kind of stuff, because this is more of an office hours, get people's questions answered. But if maybe, for example, you go to the YAML repo and provide some suggestions in the discussion, maybe we can work with Scott DeRoe. Sorry, Scott, to put you on the hook, to maybe do some videos about YAML and
Yeah, and also like it's hard to understand the question. If you
Yeah.
want to be more specific, that would be great. I assume you are talking about Canvas YAML.
That's right.
So practical it is, like if you have the YAML, you have an ambiguous way to represent the application, right? Which is what is important, why source code is important.
Right.
And also you can share. And again, as Mark said, I already show a little bit, but if you want to go to practical, a good example is Pack Canvas Create. You can generate an application from an API contract, like Open API, things like that that we build. If you have a source code, you can build ourselves. You can automate generation of app, or it's basically a source code for that. But more than that, I would need a clarification question.
Yeah, and I would say
So,
to be thorough.
actually,
like,
an
go ahead,
important-
Jen. I was going to say
important
what I
note
think you're going to say.
So important note here is we're actually into the last couple of months of AMAs now. So this is May and April. So we've already cleared all the June ones, just so you know.
Yeah,
That was
that's
asked
right.
last month. So if you're
Oh,
wondering
gotcha.
what to ask follow-up, this was asked last month.
Oh,
Perfect. Good point, Shan. And I think just to be complete, as Shan alluded to earlier, like the solution XML, the vast majority of what you see in solutions, specifically the XML stuff, is as part of the native Git integration work becoming YAML over time. There will still be some, the point there is that you will start to see consistency across the Power Platform that and we can get in the debate of YAML isn't a markup language discussion, but let's not go there. The markup of Power Platform effectively is YAML, right? The metadata, however you want to describe it, like to be precise. There will be some, and that's already the case for Copilot Studio bots, right? Test engine, right? There will be some cases where, for example, and I don't know if Chris is on the call, I don't know if Power Automate will ever convert the Power Automate JSON to YAML, because the Power Automate JSON is the Logic Apps JSON, right? Because Power Automate is a low-code abstraction on top of Logic Apps. So there might be some edge cases where the format, in the source control is not YAML, but we're trying to get to a world of consistency across the Power Platform.
But the presentation that you did at Build that you does contain a lot of
That's a great point. Go watch the build session, and that'll hopefully answer some of your questions. All right. Would it be possible to have an update on the low-code plugins progress, roadmap, and objectives, especially in relation to existing plugins and/or automations in the platform? For example, classic workflows, business rules, etc. I've fed back on the GitHub repo, but would be good. Oh, so I'm guessing the PowerFX GitHub repo, but would be nice to have an overview in this forum. I don't know that we have anybody, I mean, Shan is from the Dataverse team, but I don't know that we have anybody working on low-code plugins on the call. I'll pause for a moment, and if you do, feel free to come off mute.
Watch this space. I'm actually doing a video on this right now. So,
all right, there we go. Great plug for Scott.
Tag you
Yeah.
in.
yeah, so I'll share it with this group when I've done it.
All right,
Excellent.
so was that one? Can Dataverse data flows be triggered via an API? Last time we checked, it was not possible. Curious if this has moved forward at all for post-environment setup data hydration. I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if anybody else, Shan or anyone else does. I think the answer is still no, but somebody keep me honest.
Yeah, I would expect it to be. So I'm actually surprised it's not. I'll have to follow up with that team to get a
Awesome.
different
Thanks,
answer.
Shan. Right on. So I think the wording of this one is a little bit imprecise, but I think we can get the gist of it. What controls visibility of the default solution? In some scenarios, it doesn't show in the environments list. So I think they mean the default environment, not the default solution, because they reference the environments list. Some things that can only be done in the default environment. Why? When is it hidden? Default environment hidden. That's interesting.
I
What is
don't
the
think
roadmap?
it's not possible to hide it. So, but I made the
Yeah,
same
so-
assumption when I read it than you did, that they're talking about the environments, but it's not ever hidden.
Yeah, so I'm gonna ask the person who asked this question, maybe we don't have any, first of all, generally speaking, you can't hide the default solution. If you have some special arrangements with Microsoft, please like go talk to your account team. And then have them work with the appropriate team internally. But generally speaking, you cannot hide the default environment.
I can talk to the permissions though, if folks are curious. So
Sure.
it's not really default environment specific, but for any environment to see it in the environment picker, you need either the system admin role, system customizer, environment maker, or basic user role. And it is actually it's coded to those roles versus being permission based.
Awesome. Thanks,
I would
Casey.
say that's
So-
also Power Apps, Power Automate. That's a little different
So
logic in there.
So I'll hypothesize maybe someone has changed the name of one of those roles. And we're looking at the names of that maybe, because you can't, those are non-customizable roles and you can't remove people from that in the default environment.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure. So this one, I think, to really help answer your question, probably need to do some follow-up. Next one, any advice or guidance and improvements to the Power Platform pipelines or pipelines for Power Platform when various solutions share the same Dataverse tables? This can be quite torturous, removing tables and then re-adding each table and only metadata. So this is, again, one of those things. I don't think this is really a pipelines question. This is more a solutions question that manifests when you're using pipelines. But Shan, do you want to kind of address this?
Sure, I
notion of-
actually have some good news here. We're actually putting the final touches on a new table segmentation experience. When you go add existing tables, today you gotta make choices up front of whether or not you have table metadata and whether you do all objects. And then if you don't do all objects, because you shouldn't unless it's unmanaged, you have to go through 10 different tabs of all the child things, pick and choose which components you have. So everyone just gives up and says add all objects, and that's the worst thing you could possibly do. But that experience is now going to automatically do that on the server. So when you go add table, you pick a table, we'll automatically make all of those settings for you. You can review them and make adaptations to them if you'd like, but at least all the hard part of that will be there. The end result will be once you add a table to your solution, it'll be in there properly. But you shouldn't be putting the same table in multiple solutions. If you're sourcing from a single source environment, multiple different solutions, you should not be putting the same component in two different solutions, or you will end up, in my case queue, of having problems of trying to unwind solution interdependency issues and inability to upgrade and delete later on. So just try not to get to the point where you have the same component in multiple solutions. But as far as adding a table and the extensions you do to a table, we're making that easy, and that should be available to you in the next couple of months here.
Awesome. Thanks, Shan. Next question. So first of all, I'm going to caveat. Whoever asked this, thanks for asking a difficult, thought-provoking, controversial, potentially question, right? Like we like those, but the reality is there are never perfect answers to these questions. So I'm going to give it my best shot and let the rest of the team chime in. Given all the power of Pack CLI, what is the case for PowerShell? When we learn, when should we learn both, or should we learn both? Really discuss. So I think this is a very complicated question to answer. It's a very opinionated question to answer. Historically, PowerShell is typically more often used for like people who are admins, etc. Right? Traditional professional developers. The market is kind of spoken in the de facto experience is that if you have anything for pro devs, you have a CLI, right? So that was the thinking behind creating Pack CLI. The reality, though, is that Pack CLI serves both the inner loop in software development and the outer loop in software development. So for those of you not familiar with the term, like the stuff that you do day in, day out as a developer on your machine and in your environment, that's kind of the inner loop. Once you get into source control and do build and deployment automation, that's sort of the outer loop, oversimplified. And there is certainly overlap, right? But the intent of Pack CLI is to support the developer inner loop and outer loop. And The PowerShells is much, the PowerShell modules from Microsoft is much broader in scope, right? So there will always be an intersection of things that you can do in Pack CLI that you can also do in the PowerShell commandlets and vice versa, right? But they do somewhat target different personas with overlap. And so we certainly talk to all the teams who build the PowerShell scripts, and we kind of have this discussion, but we try to minimize what we put into Pack CLI with the guiding principles. Does it support the inner loop? Does it support the outer loop? And if so, then we consider putting in Pack CLI.
Well, the good thing about Pack CLI is that it's useful from anywhere, right? If we had focused on the PowerShell, it would only be useful for PowerShell.
That's right.
So that's driving factor to that discussion.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and I would add, like, Pack is a CLI, it's a command line interface, right? PowerShell, I don't know if you, in this question, are talking specifically about the Power Apps commands for PowerShell or PowerShell in general. I see no reason to do not join these two. Like, you can write scripts in PowerShell using Pack CLI as well. So,
in fact, every script I write that uses Pack CLI uses PowerShell.
Same here. So should you learn both? Why not?
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. All right. Test engine roadmap looks great. It would be great if the tests were isolated from each other so that they can be run in parallel. One concern is the amount of time a large number of tests running sequentially could take.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. The one thing a little caveat here is the reference to tests. So we are assuming that test is one YAML file here, not test cases. Because if you try to say that these are isolated from one to the other, it gets messy and you will never be able to author tests reliably. So we're not going to go there. We're never going to parallelize test cases. But that doesn't mean that you can't.
Can I comment on that?
Of course.
So I think partially, like, to rationalize that is that test engine, generally speaking, is an integration test framework first and foremost in its default behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can do connector mocking, which kind of makes it feel a little bit more like unit testing, but it's really it's a UI testing framework that by definition, UI testing is typically thought of as integration testing. And there are all sorts of side effects of trying to parallelize something like that. Yeah. If you're truly doing unit testing, parallelization makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. So we will use existing infrastructure to be able to execute things in parallel on different servers, all that stuff. But internally inside the test engine, it's not my plan to do that.
Right. Thank you, Peter. Where are we on time? Oh, we are at time. So I just want to, first of all, thank everybody who attended. We had record attendance today. At the highest glance I saw was 270 people. That's awesome. First of all, thank you to everybody in the room from Microsoft. Hopefully, for us, we're human beings, and seeing this many people, joining on office hours to ask us about put our blood, sweat, and tears into really means a lot to us. So thank you. Please spread the word. I want to see more people in the office hours next month, and let's keep growing this community. Thanks to the folks in the community. We will see you next week or next month.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.